Okay, see everybody's coming in. Welcome everybody. We're really excited for you to be here. We're welcoming Laura Sias and Chazz Woodson today here with Aaron Jenkins to talk about the second part of our diversity series, talking about race and recruiting, especially, and kind of how it looks and plays in some of the in college recruiting and on college teams. So I'm very grateful to have this kind of expertise with head coaches in Division I, former head coaches. So I'm gonna kick it off to Aaron and just thank you guys for being here, and I hope you get a lot out of tonight.
Hi guys, thank you for joining us again tonight. We have Laura and Chazz with us. They're just going to give a brief introduction as to who they are, and then we'll get right into our question portion. I have some prepared questions, and then if we have time at the end, we will open up the floor for participant questions. So ladies first, so Laura, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Laura Sias. Played a Division I college career. As soon as I was finished with my college career, went right into coaching while also playing for the Canadian World Cup team. So I just finished recently a 17-year head coaching career at Rutgers University. And then within the last year, retired from college coaching to focus on my young family, and luckily was able to get on board with Centercourt. So I am the girls lacrosse director at Gillette, and I run their CLC Bold club program.
All right, Chazz, you're up.
Yeah, follow that. I'm Chazz. I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, 20 minutes from here, and 25 minutes from here, and played at Brown University. And I was fortunate enough to move on from there and play professionally through 2017. And, from 2000, I'm an education major, so I kind of always knew I was going that path. So I initially was also a Teach for America Corps member, did that for 2 years, kind of stepped away. I was teaching fourth grade, stepped away to kind of pursue this whole lacrosse deal, and then gradually worked my way back into teaching. So the last 6 years, I spent teaching phys ed at a prep school down in Miami. And that was pretty much it. That entire time I've been coaching, and then just took over as the head coach at Hampton University. I accepted the job in June, moved up here to Virginia in mid-September. So here we are.
Okay, very impressive resumes. So we'll get started right away. Our first question is, what should student athletes know about the current recruiting picture? Laura, you can answer first, and then Chazz, you can go ahead and answer.
So I think overall, obviously the current recruiting picture is a little bit different than it has been in recent years, with people navigating the pandemic and delays that some colleges are having in the recruiting process because they've been limited in their ability to get out on the road and really relying on virtual, film and video. And then, in that realm, what opportunities do kids have to create virtual looks and film? So that in itself is different. Right now, the recruiting picture, relative to diversity and all of that. And I can speak, specifically to my experience and to girls lacrosse. And certainly, Chazz can speak more to the men's side of things. But, what I experienced in my time as a college coach was that there wasn't a ton of diversity when you were going to tournaments and when you were sitting there and watching teams coming through at some of these large tournaments that the majority of college coaches are attending. And, it was a conversation that, was had at the time. And it's a conversation that I even have been having with some of my former colleagues recently of, why is there a lack of diversity in girls lacrosse or women's lacrosse? And it's a conversation I would have with a lot of my colleagues at Rutgers because, specifically the women's soccer program, they had a lot of diversity on their roster, and so many of their players were coming from the same areas that I was recruiting, but I wasn't experiencing a diverse pool. You know, in my recruiting, that was something that I always kind of questioned, why was that happening and what's going on at the grassroots level, you know, and are there players out there that just aren't getting the opportunity to be seen at some of these recruiting events? So I think, you know, in my conversations, I even had a bunch of conversations with college coaches this morning, and, you know, since I recently left, that hasn't changed. You know, people do still see a lack of diversity in what they're being exposed to. So, you know, the bigger question is kind of how can we change that, and how can we create more opportunity for, you know, minority players to get on the scene and be in, you know, places where college coaches are really getting exposed to these players. So I think right now it's just that question of, where is the downfall, you know, where is the gap, and why there is such, you know, such a lack of diversity when it comes to girls lacrosse, and then translates directly into the college lacrosse recruiting. So.
And Chazz?
Yeah, I think, and Laura touched on a handful of different things there that I think are all very important. I think as it pertains to just the big picture right now, you know, as she mentioned, this is a year and a time unlike any other. And obviously you're dealing with the whole COVID situation, but then from a recruiting standpoint, you're also dealing with players getting an extra year, in some cases getting an extra 2 years. You've got guys transferring to different schools, and that's throwing the picture off. You've got the dead period for us as college coaches where we can't actually go out and evaluate anybody. So we're spending all our time staring at YouTube and Huddle and trying to figure this out. So I think one of the things is to be patient, but I think the other thing is to be very deliberate. And I would tell this to anybody really, you know, even when I was coaching high school, it's the same idea. Go after the schools that you're interested in, the schools that make sense for you as a school, the places that you want to spend the next 4 years. I don't know if it's quite the same on the women's side, but I know on the men's side of things, a lot of athletes are very caught up in the idea of playing Division I, and it's got to be Division I. It's like Division I or bust. When in reality, there's so many more opportunities out there. There's so many opportunities in general. If playing lacrosse is the ultimate goal, there's a ton of opportunities. But there's so many more opportunities for the Division II and Division III level than there are the Division I level. And so if your whole focus is just Division I, you know, there's just not enough spots to go around, and I don't want to say you're setting yourself up for failure, but if it's all or nothing, you know, you're putting yourself in a box. I would say figure out what it is that you want out of your experience, and find school, like you have to do some legwork. Find schools that match what you're looking for. And you may find, you know, I always tell a story of, we had a kid who I thought was a Division I caliber goalie, who was not yet a Division I caliber athlete. He was a late bloomer, but he could stop the ball, and he just didn't get any looks because he certainly was not ready athletically. During the fall of his senior year, he took a visit to a school that reached out to him, a Division III school, great academics there, and he went on a visit and loved it, and ended up loving and having a great 4 years there. And really, that's what it's all about. It's about having a phenomenal 4 years on and off the field, and then hopefully setting yourself up to do whatever it is that you want to do after school. So there's that side of it. And then the other thing I think is kind of along those same lines. You know, if there are schools and you do feel like you're legitimately being overlooked, then put yourself out there. You know, get your film in front of, I know for me, I'd say at least once every couple of weeks, I get a film of somebody that I just had never heard of, and I hadn't seen him, and I never would have found him because I didn't even know where to find him. And then all of a sudden I get this film and it's like, yes, we absolutely want that guy. Where has he been this whole time? So sometimes you have to be really proactive and just put yourself in front of certain coaches. And then, you know, you have to know that, or trust that they know what they're doing. You know, it pains me, especially because I'm such a, you know, I want kids to succeed. It pains me to tell a kid that they're not ready, or that they're not Division I ready, or, you know, that Hampton's not the place for them. But as an athlete, you have to kind of trust that that coach really knows what they're talking about, and they're looking out not just for their program, but for you as well. So I think that's a couple things of probably a whole lot of things that they should know in terms of the recruiting picture now. And then the diversity piece that Laura touched on is a whole different conversation, which I'm sure we'll get into. But my quick 2 cents on that is we have to do a better job of, one, not only exposing kids to the game, but creating an environment that makes them want to stay in the game. And then 2, again, putting out those opportunities that are beyond where they are in high school, right? If as a program, if I'm running a club program and I'm focused on all our best guys that are, you know, maybe Division I or top Division III caliber players, but I'm not focusing on this kid, he's kind of being left out and not getting the experience that he deserves, when in reality, we should be helping that kid, even if he's not, you know, Division I caliber, we should be helping him to whatever other Division II or Division III school is in his range. And I think, again, we get so caught up in seeing Syracuse, Virginia, Maryland, whatever, and we don't say to this kid, hey, what about Oberlin? What about Hendrix? What about whatever other schools that are out there? And I think that would significantly help, you know, increase the diversity angle of this, because now they can still see a path to something beyond high school.
All right, thanks guys. That you guys kind of segued into my next question, which is, when thinking of the composition of your team, how do you make your team diverse? Since Laura, you answered the first question first, let's start with Chazz with this question. You're on mute.
Can we run that back? How succinctly? Now you're on mute.
When thinking of the composition of your team, do you think about how to make your team diverse?
Yeah, so I'm in an interesting situation being at Hampton University, obviously, because, you know, by default, we may be, depending on how you look at it, right? We may be the most diverse team, or we may be just like any other team and not very diverse, but a different, you know, the other side of the spectrum. It is important for us to be diverse. So it's an HBCU, but we do not recruit exclusively Black players, which I think for us makes the diversity piece of this really easy in terms of our approach to it and our recruiting, because ultimately anybody that we add that's not Black is making us extremely diverse compared to the rest of the landscape. And by default, based on the number of kids that are playing or the dynamics and demographics of the kids that are playing throughout the nation, we have to recruit white players if we want white players, Asian players, whoever, because we're a Division I program and we need to recruit the best caliber players that we can get. So even if we're recruiting all of the top Black players, number one, they're not all going to come to us, because that's just reality, right? Hampton's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. So it automatically, we have to expand our pool if we want to be able to compete at the level that we're expected to compete. And so, you know, we are intentionally, both intentionally and by default, interested in diversity at Hampton. And I think the school is also interested in diversity. I know even when I was going through the interview process, that was something that they asked about, you know, so institutionally, programmatically, and, you know, again, just based on sheer numbers, we want to be diverse and we have to be diverse, but not just racially. You know, we're willing to look outside of the country. We're willing to look, be geographically diverse. I think that's an important piece for us because we don't want to just stick to the East Coast and the traditional schools. We want to expand across the country, north, south, east, west, but we also, we also want to find those diamonds in the rough, players that are out there in areas where they're not getting exposure. Sometimes I get film, and especially the 21s right now. I got a film a couple of days ago, earlier this week. I'm like, well, why is this guy still on the board in the first place? In fact, it was a white player from Maryland who just fits the bill. And, it's like, how has anybody missed this kid? So it's perfect for us. Those are the type of kids we want, whether they're in Maryland or Texas or Minnesota or wherever. So again, we're intentional about it, but also we have the distinct pleasure of having to do it by default as well.
Great answer, Laura.
So, I can obviously speak to my past experience, and spent the majority of my time, like I said, at Rutgers, which is an extremely diverse campus, State University of New Jersey, obviously, and a school that prides itself on diversity. And I think the athletic department directly reflected that diversity. Now, the nature of women's lacrosse, I had years with diverse rosters. I had years that didn't have diverse rosters. So our recruiting process was one of, expand our scope as much as we possibly can within our staff and bring the best possible players that we could bring on campus. And ideally that created a roster that was diverse, like Chazz was saying, in many different ways, whether it was race, religion, their geographic location within the country. Now, being the State University of New Jersey, it was always nice to have, Jersey represented strongly. But, it definitely, it varied. And like I touched on before, that was always a conversation that, I would have with my staff, and, was, how can we create more diversity? Because we were one of the teams at Rutgers, and there were other teams that were in similar situations to us that lacked diversity in certain years. And it was a conversation that I would always have, like I said, with my counterparts on campus. And, it just is something that, like I said, it is a big question in the sport of girls lacrosse and women's lacrosse, and kind of where is that downfall? And, we did our best, but we also needed to bring in the best possible players we could. And ideally in good years that created a lot of diversity. But like I said, there were years that the diversity just wasn't there.
Okay, that kind of segues into my next question. We touched on this a little bit, but the next question is, how can we have diversity in recruiting if the recruiting pool itself is not diverse? And what do you think, now being a club coach, the club teams can do to diversify their teams?
So, yeah, so from my perspective, and, I'm new to the club scene, and I, even just in the few months that, I've been running, my side of the club program, we've brought in a good number of, players that, are Black or Asian. And, I think that is amazing for the program. And then I always take a step back and look, okay, well, percentage wise, it's still an extremely small percentage of our players that are minorities. And, I'm always going to come back to, how do we change that? And how do we expose the sport of girls lacrosse to a more diverse landscape? So it's conversations that we have, with our executive staff and our director staff, of what kind of outreach can we be doing? How can we be introducing the sport to areas that may not have it? And that's a conversation we hear all the time for girls lacrosse. And especially, you meet players that are saying they just started playing, and their parents always say, oh, we never had girls lacrosse. I never knew what girls lacrosse was. And, I was talking to someone recently who said, my experience is that kids play the sports that their parents were familiar with. So growing up, you know, one of the first sports kids get introduced to is soccer, because everybody grew up playing soccer, right? So they all know what soccer is. And, you know, every parent knows what basketball is. So everybody grew up playing basketball. And then, you know, you get those conversations of, well, we never knew what girls lacrosse was. Like, this is the first time we've seen it. You know, I had a player come to a program last night who was in 7th grade, and, you know, her mom was like, this is the first time we've ever even seen a stick. So, you know, I think it's just that grassroots level outreach and introducing the sport. And I do think that there are some you know, some situations in lacrosse where, because we are not an Olympic sport yet, there's not as much outreach and recognition at the national level as there are for some other sports. So there's less exposure to the sport because we're not an Olympic sport. You know, and again, I keep coming back to soccer, but, you know, kids are getting exposed to national level programs. They're seeing athletes on TV like constantly that they can look up to. And we are getting more exposure in those realms, but we've got a really long way to go. So I think those are areas, you know, that we're not necessarily going to control the national scene when it comes to ESPN and things like that. And that's where you hope the college game and the professional game is going to drive those things. But our responsibility on the club level is really to just increase the exposure in areas where there may not be a lot of exposure to the sport just yet.
Great answer. Chazz, my next question is for you specifically. What does the HBCU recruiting picture look like? And do you think that we'll continue to see the trend like we saw with McCord Maker, choose a blue chip athlete choosing to go to an HBCU? He chose Howard University over, you know, Kentucky and all these huge basketball schools. He chose to go to an HBCU instead. Do you think that we might still see that trend continue? And do you think that we can bring that into lacrosse?
Yeah, I think there's when you asked first about the trend, or what does it look like for HBCUs right now in terms of lacrosse? Obviously for us, you know, I can't speak for Delaware State or UDC or Howard, their women's program. For us, I think, again, it's a matter of identifying players that can play at this level and trying to, like, ideally, we need to be able to corner the market on, you know, Black and minority players, I think. Now, when I say corner the market, it doesn't mean that they're all going to come or that they all should want to come. But we need to be a place that is considered when they consider, like you say, you start talking about an Akai Montgomery or, you know, Dami up at Syracuse or any of these guys. They need to be able to look at Hampton in the same way that they look at any of these other schools, from an educational standpoint and then from an athletic standpoint. And that comes along with building the program. So it's kind of, you know, it's a sort of a chicken and the egg, or chicken or the egg situation. But I think they work off of each other. Do I think that we'll see that trend? I have two thoughts on that. I think that the first is more of a, you know, just general, my own personal thoughts. I think it will just be a trend. I don't think it's something that's going to last, because I think there needs to be, I don't think it's gained enough momentum yet. You know, I think if we had seen 10, 12 guys jump ship all of a sudden this summer and end up in HBCUs this year, and had success, then I think you would see a lot more of it. Because that hasn't happened yet, I think it'll be a slower process, and ultimately I think it's going to kind of fade out. On the flip side, you see Deion Sanders at Jacksonville or at Jackson State, and he's kind of changing the game. You know, his recruiting class is like I think it's the #1 in FCS, and it's like top something or other overall. You know, and that's on the strength of him being there, and then you know, and guys wanting to play for him. And so I think that's kind of what we have to build at Hampton. We have to make this a program that people want to come and play for. You know, and Dion put out there fairly publicly, again, he can do this because he's Dion, but he kind of put out there that, you know, they're lacking certain resources there that, and that shouldn't be the case. That's an unfortunate reality of a number of HBCUs that, you know, they just don't have the same kind of resources and funds that some of these other bigger institutions have. And I think that's going to stem that tide a little bit. Do I think it can be done though? Absolutely. I think, and that's what we're working to, obviously. You know, we're not going to sit here and be happy with status quo. I think we've got to create a program that people want to be a part of, and a culture and an environment that people want to be a part of. And I think once that happens and we get a few guys, and they don't have to be blue chippers, they don't have to be Nakai Montgomery. They just have to be players that are willing to do the work and help change the trajectory of the program. And once that happens, then I think you will start to see guys want to be a part of that. That'll pique their interest.
I do have a follow-up question because I kind of want to push you on this a little bit.
Sure.
If you could, knowing what you know now about college and recruiting, and you chose Brown, if Hampton had a team when you were choosing your schools, would you now change and decide to go to Hampton just based off of everything that you know now, the experiences you've had? Would you have changed?
It's a great question that I've thought about a number of times, and you know, my recruiting side says there's no other answer than yes. I have to say yes right now. But the true answer is, I think if Hampton had, or any HBCU had, a program that was established, didn't need to be phenomenal. When I went to Brown wasn't phenomenal by any means. But I stepped on campus and I had a great visit. I turned down full rides, or a full ride. I turned down a school that I was very interested in from the very beginning, before any of my recruiting process actually started. And I turned it down because I felt comfortable, and I felt like when I got to Brown University and I stepped on campus, and I had my visit and all that, I felt like that was the place I wanted to be. And I was comfortable with the staff and the guys, the coaches that were recruiting me, and I felt like that was the spot. And ultimately, I think if I had felt that at an HBCU and an established program, I absolutely would have gone to one. Especially since I hate the cold and didn't want to go anywhere up north in New England. I didn't want any part of it, but I ended up there. I think if there were a place like Hampton or a place like Morehouse, you know, something like that, absolutely. Hands down, I would have taken that opportunity. And so that's what we're trying to get to, right? We want this to be a place where when I speak to a recruit on the phone, or when they come to campus and visit, they feel like it's home, and they feel like they're around a staff that cares about them and is going to nurture them and help them develop into the young men that they want to be. So, yes.
All right, good answer. You got your recruiting hat on. All right, this question is for the both of you again. You both come from highly competitive programs. What was the culture like on your team, and how was diversity incorporated on your teams? Laura, you can go ahead and answer this one first.
Okay. So culture was always a huge thing for me and for any of the teams that, you know, were surrounding us at Rutgers. And the overall culture was really solid. You know, and the one thing that I think is really great too, and something for, you know, people to consider during the recruiting process is like, yes, you do want to investigate the culture of the program that you're looking at, but you also want to look at the culture of the athletic department. Because those are the people that you are going to be surrounded by on a daily basis. Yes, you are going to spend an enormous amount of time with your teammates and with your coaches, but you're also spending an enormous amount of time with other student athletes. And those are the people that you're going to be able to relate to. So I think really looking at the athletic department as a whole and the culture that comes along with that athletic department is a huge piece of the recruiting process. You know, we had a great culture, and we definitely, I was there a long time. So, you know, there were times when really important situations occurred, whether it was in our team or on another team. And I mean, I was there when, you know, I don't know if anyone remembers, but back in the day with Rutgers women's basketball, there was, you know, a situation where a radio host made very derogatory comments, and it was on the national scene. And that, you know, that sparked a lot of really good conversations within our team, on our campus, within our athletic department. You know, we had a situation within our team one year where, you know, one of my players said just a really uneducated statement to one of my players that was Black, and it was not intended to come off the way that it did, but it allowed us to have a really good conversation within our team. And a really good conversation where I had a couple players that were able to just communicate to the rest of the roster how they felt about their experience, you know, how comments that, you know, things that can be said or made that no one even really thought about, how that could impact them. And, you know, so I do think that a lot of times people say, you know, really investigate the culture of the team and really look at, you know, is there diversity on the roster? You know, is there diversity within the athletics department? And from my experience with women's lacrosse, I would say you may be the first in that program. You may have to be the first minority player because of the landscape in girls lacrosse and because there is a lack of diversity in recruiting. So that's where I come in with the piece about athletic departments, because if you are on a campus or within a department that has good diversity and has a great culture, potentially the exact team that you're within may not have gotten to that point yet. But you're still going to be in a really positive and fulfilling environment that's going to be a great home for you for 4 years or 5 years, you know, whatever the timeline may be. So, you know, so yes, I mean, culture is hugely important. I don't think teams have a chance at success at all if their culture is not at the forefront, you know, for the coaching staff. But again, I guess long story short is I think the culture of the athletic department and the campus is hugely important as well.
All right, Chazz, you're up.
Yeah, I would echo all of that. I think, you know, from a player standpoint, my experience as a college player, I can't really say, to be honest, that we had much of a team culture or identity. I do think we were a pretty, I don't know if maybe open, for lack of a better word, open culture. I kind of lost my train of thought there because I'm trying to label something that might not have a label. But I think we did reflect the Brown community, which is a very kind of liberal, open, free thinking type of place. And so for me, you know, I had a very different experience because I didn't hang out with much of my team. I liked my teammates. I was friends with them. But the majority of my social time was spent within the Black community and away from the lacrosse team. Some of that was by design, because when I first got to campus, having grown up in a predominantly white academic environment my entire life, it was important for me to connect with the Black community up there, which kind of goes back to that idea of like, would I have gone to an HBCU? I think I might have done that because it was something that I needed. I needed that environment. And so I found that, and I sought that out as soon as I got to campus. And you know, and most of my best friends now from college are people that I met within the first week of school, and none of them were on the lacrosse team. And that's no shade to any of my teammates that may hear this. Like, I love those guys, but That's just how it worked out for me. But I was always, with very few exceptions, I was very comfortable with my team and my teammates. You know, at Hampton, I have gotten the sense that there's a very and actually, to that point, backing up a little bit, I think it is important, not just, you know, Laura mentioned making sure the athletic department in general is a good fit, but I think the school in general matters, especially if it's a smaller school. You know, again, I encourage our guys at Hampton to not just connect with the team and not just connect with the athletes, but get to know everybody on campus. You know, number one, you don't know when that's going to pay off down the road, but also we need to be ambassadors for the sport and for the athletic department. So if we just kind of keep to ourselves, we're doing our program a disservice. So I think it's important to know, you know, what the general culture and feel of the school itself is, and how do you fit into that? Do they have the programs that you want to be a part of outside of lacrosse if you have the time? And do you plan to make that kind of time? For me, that was important. And so while I've encouraged our guys to do that at Hampton, I have found that it's a very tight-knit group. And they're not all the same. Some of them are into very, very different things. But ultimately, they have a really tight bond that existed before I got there, and it seems to be strengthening even now while we're not together. We're doing everything remotely. In fact, we've got a team call in about 20 minutes. But you know, we've had some great conversations about a number of different things, whether it's related to race or the politics and stuff that's going on, or just, you know, things about Hampton, things that are going on for them individually, or that they love about the school. We were able to establish what we're calling the 5 pillars of Hampton lacrosse, and you know, one of those is brotherhood, and they said that should be the centerpiece of it all. So when you start talking about culture and you start talking about fitting in, I think our guys have a keen understanding of what that really means and why it's so important. And we harp on that, because ultimately this is about relationships. It's about our present relationships that are going to help us bond and compete together as a team. But it's also about those relationships that are going to carry them far beyond, you know, the 4 years there at Hampton.
All right, thank you for both of those answers. We are running low on time, so I do want to open up the floor for any of the participants if they have any questions. I do see that someone, Derek, you wrote in the chat that you had a couple of questions. So I'm going to read your first question, which was, what would be the best way for a Black athlete to respond in the recruiting environment? I think that question was kind of answered, but if anybody wants to touch on that, they can go ahead.
I think at least when I read that, I'd like to know what you mean by respond. That would be my first.
I mean, like, what would be your first thoughts in that situation? Like, what would be your first thought when you're thinking of, okay, I'm going to a recruiting session. How should I act? What should I do?
Got it. Yeah, I think that's a great question. For me, I would say, number one, you know, and I think the fact that you're here and then you're asking this question probably tells me a little bit about who you are and your character. But I think the one thing that you want to be conscious of is that coaches are not just evaluating your play, but they're also evaluating your character and, you know, how you interact with your teammates, how you interact with your coaches, how you, and not just your coaches, but, you know, if it's a prospect camp or something, how you speak to and respond to the coaches that are there evaluating, all that stuff. I think then after that, it's about, you know, these recruiting things and prospect days tend to be very individualistic. You don't get a lot of, in my opinion, great team play unless they're teams that have kind of come up the ranks together as young guys all the way up through high school. But a lot of them that are all-star teams or whatever, there's a lot of one-on-one stuff. And so you may or may not have your time in the spotlight, but you need to take care of all the little things throughout the course of a game or a tournament or whatever, whether it's ground balls, riding hard, making the right lacrosse play, as opposed to just the right play for you at the moment. How do you communicate? Are you hustling everywhere? Are you hustling on and off the field? Those type of things I think matter. I think that would be what's front and center in my mind. If I were approaching it, and if I were talking to somebody else about how to approach it, take care of the little things, and then play as hard as you possibly can, and play your game. Don't try to fit into what you think somebody wants you to do. Go out and do what you do, and do it to the best of your ability.
Yeah, I would also just add that, in the recruiting process, when you are corresponding with coaches, or, if you do have a visit with a coach, that you're as informed about that particular program and that school as you possibly can be, making sure you're not just sending generic letters out or generic emails. Really be specific. Hey, I watched your last game against such and such university. It was really exciting how it came down to the last 3 minutes. Things that a coach is going to pick up on and say, wow, this player is really interested in my school and is really paying attention to my school, just as much as you would hope that coach is paying attention to you. As an individual, you want to make sure you're showing that love to each of the schools you're interested in as well.
And we'll take one more question.
I was just going to say, I would second that, because what you don't want to do is send an email to Hampton telling them how you want to be the next Buckeye, because it happens.
Aaron, can I just ask a clarifying question for Chazz too about, I know not many people maybe on the call know about HBCUs, but, and just, he mentioned that there are non-Black players that you're recruiting, or just like what the racial makeup just kind of a breakdown of, if I'm a white lacrosse player or a white athlete in general, what to think about maybe a school like that as an option, where I just as a PSA, for everybody out here.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like just flipping the normal situation on its head. We're Hampton University is probably about 98, if I'm not mistaken, I think about 98% Black students, and the lacrosse program is, obviously we have smaller numbers. We have 35-ish guys right now, so the percentage is a little bit different, but I think we have 3 white players on the team right now. We are actively recruiting 5 or 6 white players. We have recruited and missed out on far more than 6. So yeah, I think that's kind of the general dynamic, but the school is by no means opposed to diversity. And like I said, the university itself, Hampton specifically, I can't speak for every HBCU, but Hampton is very interested in diversity and very welcoming of that, particularly in athletics.
I would agree. I can speak for Howard because I'm a Howard grad. So I do know that our athletic teams were probably the most diverse part of our school. So, come one, come all. But our last question is from Christina, and she wants to know, at what point in high school would you suggest reaching out to coaches at schools you're interested in?
I can touch on this first. I think in freshman year, you can start to really do your research, and start to get an idea of what you may or may not be interested in when it comes to a school. If you are playing for a club, you would have access to some sort of recruiting software or profile, a Sports Recruits or a Connect Lax or something like that, and making sure that you're populating that. any film that you may have is getting up on that site. I mean, it depends on what you're looking for. I mean, Division I, Division II, and Division III all have different recruiting rules. So Division I is the most strict in terms of when they can interact with student athletes. So that's something to consider. You're really not interacting with Division I schools until your junior year. So there's time there. Division III schools can interact at any time, but they're not necessarily, looking to recruit kids too early either, even though they're allowed to have those conversations. So I think early on, it's a great opportunity to get on campuses, to go to camps and clinics and start to get a feel for what's out there and, campus size. And do you want a rural campus or more of a city setting, or do you want a big population, all the different things that are there. And I think what this past year has taught us, outside of all the, life lessons and world lessons that we're all being exposed to, is that the college athletic world is fragile. And, picking a university that is going to be your home for 4 years is the most important, and making sure that if sports or lacrosse was not in the mix, you would be very happy in that setting. And that would be a place you would really want to be and live for 4 years. So I would say start with university focus first, academics, setting, population, and then look at the athletic side next.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that's the advice that I gave all of my high school players over the years, especially if you're not an athlete or player that's being highly recruited. If you don't have schools knocking at your door, then you want to be very specific and intentional about figuring out all of those different things that Coach mentioned and more. We used to have a list of probably 15, 16 different things that you just want to consider as to figure out where you want to be. The other thing I think is, again, be realistic about yourself. You have to be honest with yourself. And there are so many highlight videos out there that you can kind of compare yourself to. And I mean that in a constructive way, not in a, mentally detrimental place. If XYZ recruit is going to Yale or going to Virginia, look at his film and look at your film. And if your film doesn't look anything like that, then that's probably not the type of place you should be looking at. Now, that's not to say don't take your shot. If you want to, listen, I was 5'7", 5'8", or whatever, and 145, 50 pounds my junior year of high school, and I sent emails with no film whatsoever to probably 5 or 6 different Division I basketball schools. On that list was, I don't remember them all, but I remember Georgetown was on there, and I remember Clemson was on there, because those are the only 2 that responded to me. And they did not say, yes, you can come play here. They were just nice enough to respond. And, but, that was out of my league. And if I was really serious about playing basketball, I probably could have looked at, some Division III school somewhere. And, but be honest with yourself. If you're not a Georgetown basketball point guard at 5'7", 145, that's probably not where you should be looking.
All right, that wraps up this webinar. I want to thank you guys for participating. I think that we had a really good conversation. We got a lot of good information from you all's perspective. And, I hope that you guys can join us for, not you guys, the panelists, but the people participating will join us for our last and final installment, which will be February 11th at 7.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Laura and Chazz. It's great to have you guys here. We'll be, it's great to have somebody like Laura with all the experience you have, working with our young women, and Chazz, we'll be pulling for you and rooting for Hampton coming in the future here. So best of luck with everything. And thank you guys for tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much.
If I can be of service, please feel free to hit me up.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Coach.
Got it. Thank you guys. All right. Have a great
Bye.
night, everybody. Bye-bye.